Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you joining us here today. Wonderful. Okay, we're about a minute into the call. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions at the end of my presentation. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with our Alt Protein Careers call today. So I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Asia Sheehab, and I am an academic community coordinator here at the Good Food Institute, or GFI. My background is in biology and nutrition, and prior to joining my work at GFI, I was doing clinical nutrition research. So that's kind of the lens that I came at alternative proteins with. And so now, while I'm at GFI, I am primarily focusing on supporting students around the world, specifically through our university chapter program called the Alt Protein Project, which I'll be sharing a little bit more about later today. So who is this call designed for? This call that we have on a quarterly basis is truly for anyone who just wants to learn more about how to build a career in the alternative protein space. So maybe you're somebody who has a technical background, or you have a non-technical background. Maybe you're a student, undergraduate, graduate level. Maybe you're in an entry-level position right now and looking how to kind of progress your career. Maybe you're a professional with many, many years or decades of experience, but you're really interested in transitioning into the alt protein space. So regardless of what background you're coming from, this call is really here to set you up for success, to let you know some of the resources that we have here at GFI to support your career growth, and kind of figuring out those difficult questions of what step can I take next to build my alt protein career. So I will try to keep all of these different groups in mind as I'm speaking today, but feel free to drop any of your questions in the Q&A chat specifically. So not the regular chat, but the Q&A chat, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end of the call today. All right, so for today, I'll be giving a brief overview of some of our resources at GFI, starting with just sharing a little bit who GFI is, what we do in the space, what are alternative proteins for those who are newer to the field, and provide some different insights into the career fields and relevant backgrounds, and hopefully providing some tips and resources for you to find helpful in building your career. And then we will move over into a fireside chat and Q&A with our special guest today, Josh Villa Macas, who recently graduated with his master's in food technology with a focus on fermentation from the Wageningen University and research in the Netherlands. With that said, I'm very excited to dive more into a conversation with Josh later in this call and open up the floor for a Q&A, where folks in the audience are welcome to ask questions to either myself or Josh. But before we do that, I will go ahead and get started with the career overview presentation. All right, so for some of you, this might be your first time joining one of these calls. So just to set the ground or set the scene, the Good Food Institute is an international nonprofit working to build a sustainable, healthy, and just global food system. I specifically work on the GFI US team, but we also have affiliate teams in Brazil, India, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Israel. We are funded by philanthropy and have earned GuideStar's Platinum Seal for transparency, an honor that is only obtained by less than 1% of nonprofits. So that's something we're really proud of. In order to accelerate the transition toward alternative proteins, GFI focuses on our work in 3 key pillars. So our science and technology team, where I work, we work specifically to advance foundational open source research in alternative proteins and create a thriving research and training ecosystem around these game-changing fields. Our corporate engagement team builds relationships with the world's largest food manufacturers, meat companies, restaurants, and retailers to help them catalyze on opportunities in the alternative protein space. And then we have our policy team that is focused on advocating for fair regulation of alternative proteins and lobbies for government investment in more research. What motivates our work is the fact that our current system for producing meat, dairy, and eggs is extremely unsustainable and just inefficient. This system really exacerbates climate change, environmental degradation, antimicrobial resistance, as well as global food insecurity and issues of animal welfare. And despite more and more people learning about all of these issues, we're not yet seeing enough individuals changing the way that they eat. Instead, we're actually seeing per capita meat consumption continuing to climb globally. So GFI's theory of change is based on the idea that consumers will choose alternative proteins when they are as delicious, affordable, and accessible as conventional animal products. So instead of asking consumers to completely give up the foods that they know and love, we can instead make products that are just as tasty and affordable as conventional meat. And so here is the landscape of alternative proteins. We can use plants, we can use fermentation or microbes, and we can also cultivate it from animal cells. So just to dive a bit deeper, plant-based meat is produced directly from plants. These products look, taste, and cook like conventional meat. Like animal-based meat, plant-based meat is composed of protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, and water. But it also provides additional health benefits like complex carbs and fiber. An example that you might be familiar with is the Beyond Meat patty, which is actually pictured here on this slide. And basically, if you see an alternative meat product at your local grocery store right now, chances are it's probably a plant-based product. Next, we have cultivated meat, which is also known as cultured or cell-based meat, and this is produced directly from animal cells. In short, you start with a small sample of animal cells, then you place them in a bioreactor, which provides the same conditions that you would find inside of an animal, so things like warmth, water, and basic nutrients to help the cells grow. Then you can differentiate these into other types of cells, and you can arrange them in a similar structure as animal tissues. And as a result, you can achieve a product that is genuine animal meat with the same sensory and nutritional profiles. And lastly, we have fermentation. So fermentation is a powerful, flexible process for using microorganisms to produce alternative proteins. Fermentation has been used in food production for millennia. Ancient civilizations used microbial cultures to preserve foods, create alcohol, improve the nutritional value and bioavailability of foods, ranging from yogurt to tempeh. And over the past century, the role of fermentation has expanded way beyond its historical use to a much broader range of applications that we're seeing today. So there are many uses of fermentation in the broader alt protein field, and they can be broken down into three main categories. So traditional fermentation, biomass fermentation, and precision fermentation. And we have deep dives on the science of all of these different categories, plant-based, cultivated, fermentation on gfi.org. So if you're really looking to understand the science of these products on a deeper level, please do check out gfi.org. And I will just say it's important to note that even though we're describing all of these different production platforms as like three distinct pillars, We definitely foresee one large industry where we produce alternative protein products across a spectrum. So, for example, we often think of the Impossible Burger fitting really neatly into the plant-based category, but it actually uses fermentation to produce leg hemoglobin, which is the signature ingredient that gives it that bloody appearance and meaty taste. So you might also be noticing more and more dairy products in your grocery stores that are mostly plant-based, but have fermentation-derived milk protein. So this would technically be considered a hybrid product. So drawing on both of the production platforms, plant-based and fermentation. So with all of that said, when we think about the different careers and relevant backgrounds in the alternative protein space, at least right now, it can be useful to kind of segment out and think about the skills you might need to enter the plant-based industry versus the skills you'd need to enter the cultivated industry. That is helpful when you're thinking about what skills or education that you might need to pursue. But ultimately, I just wanted to kind of draw the bigger picture that we do expect this industry to be across the spectrum with a lot of hybrid products, at least to start. And so here I have the alt protein value chain. And so if you're looking for roles in science and technology, you might focus on some of these areas. You might lend your skills to like process optimization or end product formulation, or even play a more upstream role in identifying ingredients or supplying optimal inputs. And I just want to highlight that all of these segments of the alt protein value chain are really powered by research and development. And so clearly we need a lot of technological innovation here. But when we zoom out and view the entire alternative protein ecosystem, we see a really great diversity of roles. So not just limited to science and engineering. We need investment to fund all of this research. And once we have the end products, we really need to be able to establish distribution channels that make these products accessible and truly accessible to all people. So across these stages, we're depending on industry enablers, such as the labor force, business services, and compliance even. So just to reiterate, each segment of this value chain employs many different roles, requiring varying skill sets. So you'll want to keep this in mind when you're thinking about your ideal role in this growing industry. Now let's dig into the career fields and relevant backgrounds for alternative proteins. And just to preface these next few slides, one of the most common questions we get from students is, what should I study in order to pursue a career in the alternative protein field? And our answer is really not a fun one. It's that it depends, which I know is never a good answer to give, but it really does. It depends because this is an emerging technology field. So essentially, we know that certain roles are more in demand right now, but we do expect other roles to be more in demand later. So just a preface for these next few slides here. So this is the alternative protein jobs that exist across many different sectors, and it's sometimes helpful to kind of break them down and see what is available in each of these different domains. So academia, if you're a scientist, academia is probably the most established or familiar pathway for you. Research on alternative proteins is well underway at universities around the world. So getting or even having a PhD already would allow you to lead your own research group and even teach the next generation of talent. The industry is composed of business to consumer or B2C companies and business to business or B2B companies. You'll recognize many B2C companies like Impossible and Beyond Meat, for example, but B2B companies might be less familiar to consumers since they work more behind the scenes. And these can include companies that produce ingredients or design processing equipment for the entire industry. There's also the option to create a startup or work at a startup. And then there are also companies that are relatively new, but past the startup phase. On the other end of the spectrum, there are established companies that are starting to get into the alternative protein space. So these include food companies, even conventional meat companies, companies in biotech, biopharma, and other life sciences. And so compared to academia, the industry offers roles for a greater variety of backgrounds in education, especially when it comes to non-technical positions. So just like any business, alt protein companies will need to fill roles related to finance, human resources, marketing, communications, things like that. The third sector is government, which can include research in government labs. You can also direct public funding into alternative protein research as a program officer, for example, for a government research funding agency like the NSF. If you're interested in policy, you can encourage policymakers to advocate for public funding, or even become a policymaker yourself who can champion alternative proteins. And then on the regulatory side, there's a lot of work to be done to approve cultivated meat for sale in most countries. Last but not least, there are, last but not least, there are nonprofits like the Good Food Institute, which offer many ways to support the ecosystem at large. So, for example, a lot of my work right now is to support university students and faculty members in academia who are building novel alt protein courses and degree programs, as well as growing general awareness and understanding around alternative proteins at the university level. There's also a world of nonprofits focused on climate, animal welfare, and other causes that overlap with the same motivations behind the alt protein transition. So those are great organizations to keep front of mind. If you've already narrowed it down to careers in science and engineering, then these are some areas of technical expertise that are needed by the industry. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how these three production platforms differ and also overlap in what they are looking for in terms of key disciplines and expertise. GFI administered a survey to companies across the alt protein space, and out of about 130 companies, some of the most in-demand skill sets across the production platforms were food science and biotechnology. So that's one reason why we have Josh here to speak to some of those experiences as well today. And I just want to highlight that there is presently a really high demand for the right combination of scientific expertise and entrepreneurial spirit. So this is really great news for any scientists who are interested in innovation, but also in entrepreneurship. In order to build the alternative protein ecosystem, we don't just need science and engineering, we also need additional expertise. So these are some of the non-technical roles that exist in our field today. For instance, I mentioned this before, but just like any other company, alt protein companies have positions and will need more positions for business, marketing, sales, HR, finance, and many of these roles relate to consumer education, consumer acceptance of products, accessibility of products, awareness, sustainable development, which are all really critical issues to solve the future of food and make these products accessible. In this last section, I'll briefly offer some tips and resources for building a career in this field. And I'll be sharing these slides for this presentation after the call in an email, so you don't have to worry about jotting down any of the key resources because they will all be linked in the slides for you to access later on. So as I mentioned before, the alternative protein field, it is an emerging technology. And so it can sometimes be less clear of what steps you should be taking to advance your career in this space. But the lucky thing is that we can learn from a lot of patterns that we've seen in other emerging industries. So this is a list of steps for training yourself in an emerging field that came from folks in the ecological forecasting space. We're not going to dive into each one for the sake of time today, but I highly encourage you to go through each of these steps on your own time. For today's call, I'm just going to zoom in on step 2, which is to leverage existing resources within and outside this emerging discipline of alternative proteins. The lack of training resources can be a huge issue for emerging fields. So that's really why GFI has made it one of our goals to create resources and make them open access. So I'll just dive into a few resources that you should be aware of and feel full liberty to peruse more on your own time. So if you are just getting into the field and really want to understand what's going on, the student resource guide is your one-stop shop. And so it is geared towards students, but I find it is really helpful for all newcomers to the space to just get a lay of the land and understand where to begin. We also have our annual State of the Industry reports, which cover the commercial landscape, investments, regulatory developments, across all 3 of the production platforms that can help you to get up to speed on what is the current state of the industry. And we publish these periodically. So it's always good to kind of refresh each time these reports come out to make sure you're up to date on what's going on. If you're more interested in digging deeper into the science, we have a free open access online course called The Protein Transition, which I highly recommend for kind of your 101s of alt proteins. We also have a course database where people who are already teaching courses on alternative proteins or have modules built into their curriculums have shared their slide decks, their teaching resources, and made them open access. So this is a great database to look to see what universities offer courses and find out other teaching modules that exist as well. You are all here today because you are interested, at least in some level, of getting into the alt protein field as part of your vocation, as part of your job. So I highly recommend visiting gfi.org/vocation, which has all of our different career resources and our alt protein careers board. And many of you may have found today's seminar through gfi.org/events. So you might not need to already bookmark this, but for any of you who want to stay abreast of upcoming GFI hosted seminars, such as the one today, we also focus on a lot of different areas of the alt protein space, such as the science of alt protein. We have seminars dedicated to the business sides of things. For example, here on this slide, we have a business seminar tomorrow that has GFI and nutrition experts from an ingredient and solutions supplier for the food and beverage industry. And they'll be focusing on the nutritional considerations for alternative protein product development with a focus on micronutrients and protein. So it's events like this that you can find at gfi.org/events. If you are interested in research, I highly recommend taking a look at our Alt Protein Researcher Directory. And this has a full listing of labs that are hiring. Some folks in the directory list whether they're open to serving as mentors as well. So it's a really helpful resource to understand kind of what is the research space and are there any researchers that you might be able to collaborate. We have a solutions database, which is a database that highlights all of the different alt protein research ideas, commercial white spaces, and this database really helps to contextualize the field and maybe even help you narrow down the contributions or the key research areas that you might want to make that would help to shape the future of this entire field. And the last slide here I have today is in terms of building or joining an alt protein community. So this can be really helpful in having like-minded people to surround yourselves with who are working towards the same goals as you. One way that we do this through GFI is through our Alt Protein Project university program. Right now, we have Alt Protein Project student chapters at over 50 universities around the world. I highly recommend either applying to our program if you don't already have a university chapter at your university. If you're a student, we open applications in spring 2024 and would love to receive an application from your university. If you have any specific questions or want to just learn more, feel free to look at our gfi.org/the Alt Protein Project website to learn a little bit more. If you are not a student, that is okay. GF Ideas is our community for everyone else, so entrepreneurs, scientists, subject matter experts, to connect and network with folks who are interested in the things that you are as well. Alrighty, so that is all I have in terms of the career resources that are available to you via GFI, but please do take some time on your own to look at gfi.org, and if you have any questions, feel free to continue the conversation with me. I left my email here on the screen and would be happy to answer any questions that you have offline as well. And without further ado, I would love to give a warm welcome to Josh. We're so grateful and happy to have you here today to share some of your learned experiences in the alternative protein space and the wisdom that you've gained along your career path so far. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, Josh recently completed his master's in food technology at the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands and focused on fermentation there. During his program, he completed an internship working on optimizing mycelium production at a biotech company called Infinite Roots, previously known as Mush Labs. In addition to that, Josh has also served as the president of the Wageningen Alt Protein Project, where he led a team of fellow undergraduate and graduate students in building the alternative protein research and education ecosystem at the university level. So those are just a few things that Josh has done to help build the alt protein community at large, and a little bit of his background. But I'm excited to kick us off with some questions that I've prepared to ask Josh, and then we can open it up for any remaining time we have left to get questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can have a bit more of an intimate conversation here. But yes, welcome, Josh. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. I'm going to kick us off with the first question, which is that, as you know, food science is an incredibly important discipline for the alternative protein field and industry. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, what types of skills and courses did you find most beneficial when you were building your career in the alternative protein space, especially when you're pursuing your bachelor's degree in food science and technology at Parma University in Italy?
Yeah, so it's been a while since I took my bachelor's, but I think in that case, since I was still beginning with my studies, was really beginning where I wanted to fit in the world. It was mostly about developing a base skill set to understand actually what the problem is. So it was really important for me to understand actually, for example, how the behavior of meat as a food works, for me to know that, hey, these are maybe the characteristics that I can try to emulate with other kinds of more sustainable materials. So that was kind of the base. Then throughout my bachelor's, I had a lot of courses on microbiology, and that's kind of where my love for fungi in general started, and where I started seeing my niche kind of forming, going into more the potential that we have for fungi in terms of producing food that will most likely revolutionize not only the food industry, but I would say a lot of different industries. Because many of the attendees here might have seen that actually a lot of startups are doing magnificent things with mycelium. There's plant-based, there's fungi-based materials other than food. So that's kind of where my bachelor's stood in terms of my career development.
Wonderful. And just to backtrack a little bit, did you actually know when you were applying for your bachelor's degree, did you already know at that point that you wanted to do something in the alternative protein space, or is that something you discovered while you were doing your studies at Parma?
I would say that's actually something that I discovered towards the end of my internship, of my bachelor's, sorry. So I think as many other 18, 19-year-olds, I really didn't know anything about where I wanted to go, and food technology just seemed to be kind of like the most similar to what I imagined myself doing. I would say if there was a turning point of when I really wanted to go into fungi is one of my latest microbiology courses in my bachelor's, which was about bioenergetics, and it really showed me the different metabolic pathways that fungi have, and that's where I saw a lot of the potential.
Very interesting. Wonderful. And it looks like you continue to follow that interest that you picked up on at the end of your bachelor's, because you recently completed your master's in food technology, focusing on food fermentation and biotechnology. I'm curious if you could share what led you to pursue this specific degree compared to other degrees and other specializations. And yeah, how did you decide on focusing this as your next professional development goal?
Yeah, so fungi are just kind of my special interest in any ways. I really think they have a lot of potential in the tons of things they are able to do with their very peculiar metabolism. And because they were already one of my interests, I followed a lot of fermentation courses in here, and that allowed me to see kind of the role they already played in our food system so far. So many of the foods that we also consider traditional of many cultures, look at um, soy sauce or bread or any kind of dough really that is fermented, alcohol. So they're all fermented with the help of fungi. And there's already precedents, for example, with tempeh of also consuming the biomass of mycelium to kind of enforce and reinforce the diet of the general population. Other than that, I had the luck of being introduced by a friend of mine to the Wageningen Alt Protein Project, and it kind of just really cemented that there is potential that is going to increase a lot in the next few years in terms of possible career paths or research paths that people can take. So I decided to just pour myself into it and dedicate most of my time to it. And that's how I ended up where I am.
Wonderful. Yeah. And you eventually became the president of the Wageningen Alt Protein Project chapter, which we're so lucky to have you serving in that position. I'm curious if you could speak to some of the initiatives that you led while you were president of the Alt Protein Project chapter there, and what was the most valuable part of your experience in being part of the Alt Protein Project community?
Of course. So we tried to do a bunch of things with the Alt Protein project. I would say the most notable ones were seminars within the university itself in one of the buildings on our campus. We tried to get in contact with companies, with researchers, mostly local, of course, for logistic reasons. So they could come in the evenings when also students have time to give small lectures, like roughly 1.5 hours, and that was really crucial for us to get a bunch of different views on what the entire field meant to different kinds of people, because of course students tend to also be a bit more idealistic, so we had people that just really wanted to revolutionize the world, while on the other part we had people that were running a business or doing research. So the communication there, the discussions really opened up the minds of everybody and helped in cementing a bit more the deeper understanding of what the alt protein field is. Other than seminars, we also hosted a podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all of those other major platforms. Kind of the same vibe. We invited experts in the field and tried to have a discussion, both on a technical level and a more, let's say, lighthearted level in which it could be understood by more people. We also try to really foster communication with the university to try and see in which aspects research can be guided towards alt protein. And while we talked about a bunch with these kind of professors, I would say also the university itself already had an eye on it. As of now, there's a ton of different opportunities here in Wageningen to study alt proteins. When I started, not so much, but now 2 years later, it's very, very hard, I would say, to not find, for example, a physics topic within food technology that has something related with the protein transition. So we really, really work a lot on this kind of field. And lastly, we also did, of course, some social activities, especially at the beginning of the year. So we could also help students that really had already a passion for these kind of things, kind of find their community, find like-minded people to direct where they would like to spend their 2 years of masters or 5 years if it's bachelor's and masters together.
Wonderful. I think the social aspect and the community aspect is often overlooked, but so many other career pathways or educational pathways, they have professional organizations, for example, to really gather that community. So I think what you've done or what you've been able to achieve through creating community through the Alt Protein Project really, really helps a lot in helping people to have a place to explore their interests. For you through fermentation, maybe somebody else through cultivated or plant-based, but that's really awesome that you help to cultivate that type of community for learning. Awesome. Wonderful. And you recently interned at Infinite Roots in Hamburg, Germany, where you worked on the optimization of mycelium production to produce innovative foods. Could you share what skills you developed through this internship experience and how it has impacted maybe the future of your career? If you could also maybe start off by sharing how you got this internship, since I know a lot of people here today might be looking to do something like what you did of building their skills and hands-on experience. So that would be great to know kind of from the start how you got this internship as well.
Of course. So it's nice also to begin with saying some of these internships are very competitive to obtain, of course, because not only do they take place in nice, interesting cities like Hamburg, but also there is, of course, a high level of skill required to begin with, even if it's an internship. So in this particular case, because of the position I had, my studies in food technology were absolutely paramount to it. And also my position in the Alt Protein Project really helped me stand out a lot. So I can say confidently that all of my board members, so the people that really were behind the whole project during my time there, they all worked very hard for the association, and they developed some skills and some, let's say, clout behind them that really helped them stand out compared to all the other applicants and find the positions that they wanted. So in my case, the position was about mycelium production and its optimization within a food perspective. So of course, given my specialization, it was a perfect fit. And because of my special interest in fungi and in fermentation, I also had already talked a lot with other researchers, thanks to the Wageningen Alt Protein Project, about fermentation and knew more about the process of producing mycelium in bioreactors than you could expect a, let's say, student that hasn't really followed any extracurriculars that have to do with alt proteins. So these were kind of the things that mainly helped with getting the position. Then during the position, I came in thinking that I knew a lot about fermentation, and I now know that it's actually way more complicated than I thought. The process of setting up a bioreactor, analyzing the data, making questions, and answering what happens during the fermentation is really, really complicated. There's a lot to do about it. So it kind of really opened my minds on the future of the production. So I see years and probably decades of studies to really obtain a well-developed product or understand deeply the mechanisms behind mycelium growth. Other than the strictly technical aspects, I also had the opportunity to really work a lot on talking to the other players in the alt protein field, because in a company setting, of course, as you mentioned, it's way different. And it really put in perspective how different parts of basically everything can kind of be combined in the alt protein field. And then just working in a team, being able to also split a bit the tasks, all of these kind of things that you just learn on the job were really important for me to learn during my internship.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think as you were mentioning all the different aspects of what you learned, I think teamwork and just doing hands-on work on a team can really be the most impactful and teach you the most about what it might be like to work in the alternative protein field. So as much as you can, bolstering your resume with other experiences, maybe through extracurricular activities, can be a really great way to have a leg up for one of those applications. Awesome. And I would love to know from you, I know everyone's career in this field is quite different, depending on what area of alt proteins you're trying to get into, but I'm curious, based on your personal experience thus far, what advice do you have for someone looking to break into the alternative protein industry?
The main advice I would say is don't underestimate what networking is and what it can do for your career. I entered my master's actually thinking that networking was a bit overrated and not really as important as people thought. But thanks to, again, the Wageningen Alt Protein Project, I got the opportunity to talk with companies, to talk with researchers, and it really showed me that that kind of knowledge of what other people do and how they play in this field is really, really important. And so it's just throwing yourself out there, trying to talk with people, trying to offer them something that you can do. For example, for us with the Alt Protein Project, another thing that I forgot to mention is that we helped other students as well find their internships in this field. So, for example, in my case, just being able to approach someone from a big company and say, hey, this would be also a great opportunity for you to find a really nice and focused career talent pool from which you can hire more easily. And that's kind of what happened to us. So really talking a lot with people in the field helped as well, getting different opportunities, offers that set your career to start really well, especially compared to the average in the times that we are in right now, in which it might be hard for many people to find a job, especially if you're entry level in such a novel industry in which everyone wants someone that already has some kind of experience, just because otherwise it's completely in the blue.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for sharing that awesome piece of advice. I think, yeah, the work that you did through, the Alt Protein Project in terms of building those skills and really demonstrating your value to the people that you were networking with is a great way to build those deeper connections and people that you could maybe go back to and converse with when you might be looking for your next step in the alt protein space. So that's a really, really good foresight that you had with your networking. Wonderful. So I think we have about 15 minutes left on this call, and we did receive some questions in the chat. Maybe one that we could start with is for Najim, for Josh. How did you start the GFI Alt Protein Project chapter in your university? How many other members would you think is the minimum to get started? And Josh, you can maybe share a little bit and I can supplement as well.
Yeah, so I didn't found the Wageningen Alt Protein Project. I joined after the founding members actually graduated and left the university. It was quite an unfortunate moment. It was right after COVID, so it was difficult to kind of establish ourselves as an organization because everything was done online, and that's not really nice when you're trying to meet new people and trying to set up your life in a new city. But so because of that, when I became the president, it was essentially three people that really did everything. So myself and two others. Slowly, we managed to recruit more people. We recruited two more members to the board. We ended up with around 20 to 30 students that also helped us as committee members. So my answer would be maybe just at least two, so you don't have to shoulder yourself all of the work. And in terms of how to do it, I would say that Asia is the best person to ask this.
Definitely, yeah. That was super helpful to just share kind of your perspective from the Wageningen Alt Protein chapter. But yeah, Najim, I would love to connect offline as well. So feel free to email me at asias@gfi.org. But in terms of the Alt Protein Project program, we open up applications at the start of every new year. So we'll be opening them up in 2024. And we ask that you have at least two co-founding members to apply, and that both of them have a significant amount of time left at the university, since it can take some time to get an alt protein project or any student group or organization for that matter up and running. So having students who are focused in one of the key disciplines of alt proteins is really important, to have the right type of background and being able to advocate and grow your community with your alt protein project chapter. So maybe having a mixture of folks from STEM or from the social sciences is typically what we see in alt protein project applications. But yeah, so just two founders is kind of the bare minimum number, but we highly encourage prior to opening up applications and for you to submit an application to begin building on the grounds at your university. So maybe reaching out to myself or somebody else at GFI to provide an introductory seminar. We're always happy to do things like that to help you generate some interest and awareness at your university about alternative proteins and about the Alt Protein Project. Happy to do that for you as well if that could be helpful. But yeah, we do have a formal application process, and if you are accepted, we have a 5-week training program where we have all new members of the APP cohort go through a very structured training where we give you all the tools and skills and resources that you'd need to really get your Alt Protein Project chapter off the ground. And so we didn't have that until last year was our first time hosting a formal training program, but that is something that we now offer to Alt Protein Project chapters to help equip you with what to do, how to get things started in terms of all of the key objectives that we have for Alt Protein Project chapters. So yeah, I know that was a lot of words, but if you have any questions, feel free to email me at asias@gfi.org. Wonderful. And so I see we have a question, let's see, okay, so the question is, what do you think data science and machine learning could help with in the alt protein product development space? So I don't exactly have the expertise to answer this question, but I do know that we have, let's see, I added this to the Ask GFI Alt Proteins webpage, and where you can submit questions ahead of time, but we do have some resources in terms of where you can learn more on machine learning. So I'd be happy to send that to you after this call to point you in the right direction, but feel free to send me your information and we can discuss more about machine learning and point you in the right direction via email.
If I can also add something to that, I think actually data science and machine learning are very, very important to this field right now. So in all of the pillars. So in plant-based, in fermentation, and cultivated meat. I would argue that data science and bioinformatics are kind of the bottlenecks in really large-scale research. When you look at food, you are really looking at an interaction between a lot of different ingredients, between thousands of different kinds of proteins and starches and fibers and fats and simple carbohydrates. And all of those interactions are hard to predict. They are hard to model. So when you talk about plant-based, we really don't have any mechanistic explanation of why this food, this imitation product is good and why another one is bad. If you look at fermentation and cultivated meat instead, you have an incredibly complex matrix that is required to grow the cells. And we don't know how the cells interact with the nutrients. In the case of fermentation, we also don't know how the fungi react to different kinds of nutrients. So if you take the nutrients from wheat, or if you take them from maize, or if they come from seeds or from fruits and stuff like that. So we need really to understand how we can group the different kinds of strains and feedstocks that we give the fungi. And for that, we really need more developed statistical models.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight. That was a lot more than I could provide. I did drop a link to what I was mentioning before in terms of it's a Cell Ag Australia resource that gives a little bit more insight into AI, ML in cellular agriculture. So feel free to take a look there and see if that answers any of your questions. I know we got a question from someone else about, can you share more about potential openings at GFI related to nutrition? So we don't currently have any positions focused on nutrition, but we do host a career opportunities webinar. We actually have one happening later on today, if I'm getting my dates correct. But I recommend, here, I'll drop it in the chat, but this is our career opportunities webinar document where you can see what is covered in those webinars. And this is the place where you can ask any questions like this about what careers at GFI specifically might be opening up, what kinds of roles we'll be posting soon. So that's a good place to answer that question if you have availability to join that webinar later today. Oh, awesome. And my colleague just said it is at 2 p.m. Eastern time today. Thank you so much, Renee. All right, so I have a question. Let's see, for someone with a mechanical engineering background who wants to transition into the alt protein space from a non-food industry, what do you recommend they learn and do to be more qualified for roles such as process engineering? Josh, do you have any insights here on this? If not, I can take a stab at answering this.
Yes, I do. So when you grow food from plant-based or fungi-based materials, of course, you're going to need a bunch of machinery. When you look at the products that are available commercially, most of them are obtained through extruders, which are basically just screws that push the food through a small nozzle to give them a more fibrous structure and kind of make them resemble meat. Of course, they're not perfect. There is a lot of research. You have, for example, the improved version, which is shear cell technology, which needs a bunch of improvements from a more mechanical perspective. This is just one of the many examples there are. Also, for example, bioreactors are some of the most complicated stuff I have worked with, and they need different kinds of experts to work on them. As a very small example, when I was working at MATCH or Infinite Roots now, at some point, one of our bioreactors broke down, and we needed to contact the manufacturer for them to fix it for us. And for that, they had to send an engineer to us, and he was doing part of the repairs, but he also had an entire team of engineers back at home in Spain to actually help him remotely, because you have the mechanical parts that are important. There's the electrical engineering. There's actually understanding how the program works and how it sets all of the nutrients and parameters for our fungi to grow. So it's a really complicated thing. I would say mechanical engineering is not a problem at all. If you want to go more in the alt protein field, you kind of actually have your pick on which part interests you more. If it's more like the bioreactors or the actual machines, if it's large scale, pilot scale, or all of this kind of different possibilities that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you for lending that super helpful answer. I just want to go back up to one of the first questions that I saw come through. And is there any resources on finding PhD positions in this space? There definitely are. I didn't have too much time to present on this, so I know I just briefly mentioned it, but we do have a alt protein researchers directory. And in this directory, you can find a lot of labs that have opportunities for PhD students, PhD positions. And I would say that's the best place to first take a look. You can reach out to people via LinkedIn once you find them in that directory, but that might be a great place to start. And it also depends kind of where you're looking within the world, what kind of PhD program you're looking for. So if you have any more maybe specific interests, feel free to reach out to me at asias@GFI. Awesome. And going back down, I see from DG, so you are not a scientist and have no food industry background. That is A-okay. But feel very strong moral, ethical alignment with GFI's mission, and would like to find a way to contribute your experiences. Might you have any suggestions for such a career pivot to GFI and or the alt protein space? So I think in terms of GFI, we do have that webinar happening later on today at 2 p.m. Eastern, if you're able to join, where you can learn more specifically about the hiring process at GFI and any career opportunities that are coming up the pipeline, and what kind of skills you might need to fill those roles. But that would be a great place to start. I'd also highlight the student resource guide that I shared about earlier in the presentation as a good place for a newcomer who's really looking to find ways to pivot into the field, into the alt protein space. That would be a great resource to get started with. All righty. And since we do have you, Josh here from Europe, I know Europe is very large, so maybe you can't answer this question very specifically, but if you can, we got a question from Najim. So would there be opportunities in alt proteins, or would it be minimal compared to hard food science when it comes to nutrition research? And what countries in Europe are active in this kind of research? Are you aware of any countries in the European scope that would be doing this type of research, Josh?
Yeah, so it really depends on also the kind of work environment you would like to end up in. Nutrition is, let's say, a step further compared to food science, of course, because you need to have already a product to kind of compare for the nutritional aspects to see how it compares to traditional meat products or how it benefits the consumer if taken in its stead. I know that big companies do a lot of research on it right now because, of course, they have more developed products and they are just trying to optimize it. So, as controversial as this, Nestle in Switzerland often hires nutrition students for internships and then for full-time employees. I personally know of a few that are following that path, and they seem very happy. While if you go towards more a small company that is trying to develop their process to make the product, then it might be harder to find a position for nutrition. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it just really depends on which stage the company is at in terms of its life. I would say that the work positions in general are still there. Again, not only Nestle, but Danone, for example, also works a lot in nutrition, and they are also slowly trying to phase in the field of having more nut-based or plant-based milk and dairy products. In terms of the countries, I would say Europe is actually doing great in this. I wish there would be more, but the Netherlands, for example, one of my contacts at the university, a professor that really helped us a lot as the Wageningen Alt Protein Project. She is leading a program on the protein transition. And if I'm not mistaken, they got a grant of above 90 million euros from the Dutch government to follow the research on this. So the Netherlands is really, really big in investing in research on the food system to really make sure that they are on top of the game for the foreseeable future. Germany is also investing a lot of money in this, and so are Norway and Denmark. So really, you're looking more at the Northern Europe kind of side if you want to delve into the alt protein field.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering that question with a lot more context, given you're based in the Netherlands. I know we are 1 minute over time, so I think I'll wrap up today's seminar here, but thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for asking such insightful questions. I know we didn't get to every single one of them, but like I said, feel free to share your questions to me. I can also pass them over to Josh if they're more intended for Josh as well, and we can get back to you afterwards. But hope you all have a great rest of your day, wherever you're zooming in from, and hope to see you in the next one. All right. Thanks again, Josh, for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me over.